The first drops began falling just before dawn, each one a gentle whisper against the window pane. Sarah stirred in her bed, pulled from dreams by the soft percussion of water meeting glass. She didn't open her eyes immediately. Instead, she let herself drift in that peaceful space between sleep and waking, where the world feels cotton soft and infinite. The rain grew steadier, finding its rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. A lullaby older than memory. Sarah pulled her quilted comforter closer, feeling its weight settle around her shoulders like a warm embrace. The fabric still held the lavender scent from the dryer sheets, mixed now with the clean electric smell that rain brings through open windows. Outside, the world was transforming. The garden that had been dusty and tired from weeks of summer heat was drinking deeply, gratefully. Each leaf became a tiny vessel, catching drops and releasing them in miniature waterfalls to the soil below. The roses by the fence bent their heads as if in prayer, their petals darkening from pale pink to deep rose. Sarah finally opened her eyes. Her bedroom was bathed in that particular gray light that only rainy mornings can create, soft, forgiving, timeless. It was the kind of light that made everything look like a watercolor painting, edges blurred and gentle. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, then thought better of it. Not yet. This moment deserved to be savored without the intrusion of notifications and news. She sat up slowly, her bare feet finding the cool wooden floor. The house was quiet, except for the rain. Her husband, Michael, was already downstairs. She could smell coffee beginning to brew, that rich, dark aroma that meant home and safety and the start of something good. Through her window, she watched the rain veil the street beyond. The old maple trees that lined the sidewalk swayed gently, their leaves performing an ancient dance. A robin landed on the fence post, fluffed its feathers against the wet, and seemed entirely content despite the weather, or perhaps because of it. Sarah wrapped herself in her soft robe, the one Michael had given her last Christmas, cream-colored fleece with deep pockets perfect for keeping hands warm. She padded toward the door, but paused at the window for one more moment. Rain transformed everything. It made the ordinary extraordinary, turned the everyday world into something from a storybook. The staircase creaked in all the familiar places as Sarah descended, third step from the top, seventh from the bottom. The house was old, built in 1924, and it spoke its own language through sounds like these. Rather than being unsettling, these creaks and groans felt like conversations with an old friend. The living room was dim, lit only by the gray light filtering through lace curtains. Sarah and Michael had spent last Sunday antiquing in the countryside, and they'd found those curtains in a small shop run by a woman who must have been 90 if she was a day. "These belonged to my mother," the woman had said, folding them with careful hands. Now those curtains filtered the stormlight into something magical, casting delicate shadows of flowers and vines across the hardwood floor. Sarah paused to appreciate it, this small beauty that would last only as long as the rain and the morning. The kitchen was warmer, brighter. Michael had turned on the small lamp over the sink, and its golden glow pushed back against the gray day. He stood at the counter, still in his pajama pants and an old university sweatshirt, measuring coffee grounds with the precision of a scientist. Sarah hummed, wrapping her arms around him from behind. She rested her cheek against his back, feeling the soft cotton of his sweatshirt, the warmth of him. "Good morning, love," he said, turning in her embrace to kiss her forehead. They stood together, listening. The rain had found a new rhythm now, heavier, more insistent. It drummed on the roof, gurgled through the gutters, pattered against the back deck. "Perfect day to stay inside," Sarah murmured. Michael poured water into the coffee maker, and it began its familiar burbling song. Sarah smiled. "The blueberry ones?" She moved to the refrigerator, already planning. They had fresh blueberries from the farmer's market, bought just 2 days ago from the man with the kind eyes and weathered hands who grew them on his small farm upstate. They had good butter, real maple syrup from Vermont, eggs from the neighbor's chickens. The coffee finished brewing, and Michael poured 2 mugs, hers with a splash of cream and 1 sugar, his black as midnight. They carried them to the kitchen table and sat, warming their hands on the ceramic, watching the rain through the window that overlooked the backyard. Sarah asked, Michael smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way she loved. They laughed together, remembering. That had been 12 years ago, when the house was a fixer-upper and they were young and broke and wildly in love. They'd fixed the roof, eventually. They'd fixed a lot of things, but some things, like mornings together, like coffee and conversation, like the pleasure of watching rain, those hadn't needed fixing. Those had been perfect from the start. Making pancakes, Sarah believed, was a form of meditation. There was something deeply satisfying about the ritual of it, the measuring, the mixing, the waiting for the griddle to reach just the right temperature. Michael assembled the ingredients on the counter: flour, sugar, baking powder, salt. A large bowl for mixing, a smaller one for the wet ingredients. The blueberries, still cold from the refrigerator, their skins frosted with that delicate bloom that proved they were fresh. Sarah suggested. It was their usual division of labor, perfected over years of weekend mornings. They moved around each other with the easy grace of long familiarity. Michael measured flour, being careful not to pack it down, sweeping the measuring cup level with a knife. Sarah cracked eggs into a bowl, their yolks bright gold, almost orange, the color of eggs from happy chickens who spent their days pecking through grass and clover. She added milk, melted butter, a splash of vanilla extract. The vanilla was good stuff, brought back from a trip to Mexico, and its scent alone was enough to make the kitchen smell like comfort. Michael zested a lemon over his bowl of dry ingredients. The oils from the zest perfumed the air, bright and clean, and somehow exactly right for a rainy day. He used a microplane grater, working carefully, taking only the yellow skin and leaving the bitter white pith behind. Sarah asked. She poured the wet ingredients into the dry, and Michael stirred with a wooden spoon, making broad, gentle circles. The batter came together in soft folds and lumps. Sarah's mother had taught her never to overmix pancake batter. Let it be a little lumpy, she'd said. That's where the tenderness comes from. Michael folded in the blueberries last, their dark purple almost black against the pale batter. Some of them broke, bleeding their juice in watercolor swirls. While the batter rested, Sarah heated the griddle. It was cast iron, seasoned to a deep black, inherited from Michael's grandmother, along with her recipe for cornbread and her collection of thimbles. Sarah poured a few drops of water onto the surface to test the temperature. They danced and sizzled, evaporating into steam. Perfect, she said. She ladled the first pancake onto the griddle, watching it spread into a round. The batter hissed and bubbled. After a moment, small craters began to appear on the surface, the sign it was time to flip. Sarah slid the spatula underneath and turned it in one smooth motion. The underside was golden brown, dotted with caramelized spots where blueberries had touched the hot surface. Michael stood beside her, watching. He smiled at him. He did, and while she cooked, he told her about the dream he'd had, something about being back in college, trying to find a classroom that kept moving, a common anxiety dream, except in his version, all the hallways were filled with friendly dogs who wanted to play. Maybe it's not anxiety, Sarah suggested, flipping another pancake. The stack of pancakes grew on the warm plate Sarah had set by the stove. She counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Plenty for both of them, with maybe 1 or 2 left over for tomorrow, though leftover pancakes never tasted quite the same. Something about the magic of the moment they were made. They were just sitting down to eat when they heard it, a small, distinct scratching at the back door. Sarah and Michael looked at each other. "Sarah?" asked. Michael was already standing, moving toward the door. Through the glass, they could see something small and brown and very wet sitting on their back porch. "Oh," Sarah breathed, coming to stand beside him. It was a puppy. Not a tiny one, but not full-grown either, maybe 3 or 4 months old, with floppy ears and huge paws that promised it would be a big dog someday. Its fur was soaked through, plastered to its body, making it look even smaller and more pitiful. But its tail was wagging. Michael opened the door carefully. The puppy looked up at them with eyes that were somehow both apologetic and hopeful. "Hey there, little one," Michael said softly. The puppy whimpered, a small sound that broke Sarah's heart clean in two. "Do you?" she asked, though she was already reaching for the towel that hung by the door. Michael stepped back to let Sarah approach. She knelt down, moving slowly so as not to startle the puppy. She needn't have worried. The puppy practically launched itself at her, all wiggling joy despite being soaking wet and surely cold. "Oh, you sweet thing," Sarah murmured, wrapping the towel around the puppy and lifting it into her arms. It was heavier than it looked, solid and warm beneath the wet fur. She carried it into the kitchen, and Michael quickly spread another towel on the floor. Sarah set the puppy down and began to rub it dry, gently but thoroughly. The puppy stood patiently, occasionally trying to lick her face, its tail never stopping its happy metronome. "No collar," Michael observed, checking carefully. "Lost, you think? In this weather?" The puppy was starting to look more like itself as it dried. Its fur was a rich brown, the color of chestnuts, with a white blaze down its chest and white paws that looked like socks. Its ears were still comically large, framing a face that was equal parts sweet and mischievous. "We should call the shelter," Sarah said, though even as she said it, she was falling in love. The puppy had curled up on the towel, exhausted from whatever adventure had led it to their door, but its tail still thumped softly whenever she touched it. "We should," Michael agreed, but he was already filling a bowl with water, and the puppy drank it eagerly, sloppily, water splashing everywhere. "After breakfast," Sarah decided. "The shelter probably isn't even open yet." As if in agreement, the puppy yawned enormously, showing a pink tongue and tiny white teeth. Then it lay down, rested its head on Sarah's foot, and closed its eyes. "Well," Michael said. The pancakes had gone cold, but they were easy enough to warm up. Sarah heated them gently in the oven while Michael made a makeshift bed for their unexpected guest in the corner of the kitchen. He used an old blanket, folded twice, and placed it in a spot where the puppy could see them but wouldn't be in the way. The puppy, now considerably drier and warmer, had perked up at the smell of food. It sat very politely, watching them with keen interest as they moved around the kitchen. "She?" asked. "Probably not pancakes," Michael said, laughing. "But we have some chicken breast from dinner last night, plain, no seasoning." Sarah nodded. She'd had dogs growing up, though it had been years since she'd lived with one. Her childhood dog, a golden retriever named Sunny, had been her constant companion from age 7 to 22. She still missed him sometimes, felt that particular pang that comes from loving something deeply and losing it. Michael shredded some chicken and put it in a small bowl, setting it down for the puppy. It ate politely, not frantically, which Sarah took as a good sign. This was a dog that had been cared for, at least recently. Someone was missing it. Someone had to be. They ate their pancakes at the kitchen table, the puppy now sleeping peacefully on its makeshift bed. The pancakes were delicious, fluffy and tender, with pockets of warm blueberry and that subtle brightness from the lemon zest. Sarah drizzled maple syrup over hers, letting it pool in the small valleys and corners. Michael ate his with butter melting in golden pools. Outside, the rain continued its steady song. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled like vanilla and coffee and comfort. "We should think of a name," Sarah said. "Just temporarily, you know." Michael smiled. "I'm not," Sarah protested, but she was smiling too. "Okay," Michael said. They looked at the puppy, snoring softly now, one paw twitching in dreams. "Jenna," Sarah suggested. "Storm? Too aggressive," Sarah considered. "Maybe," Michael laughed. "Puddle the puppy." "Or Maple." "I like Maple," Michael said. "It's sweet." Sarah looked at the sleeping puppy with deep affection. "Just temporarily," Michael agreed, though they both knew they were lying to themselves. After breakfast, they made a plan. Michael would call the local animal shelter and the nearby veterinary clinic to report finding the puppy. Sarah would post on the neighborhood social media group with a description. They'd check for missing pet reports online. Someone had to be looking for this sweet creature. But first, they gave themselves permission to simply enjoy the morning. These kinds of rainy days were rare. No obligations, nowhere to be, nothing pressing that couldn't wait. Adding a puppy to the mix made it feel even more special, like a gift. Sarah settled on the couch with a book she'd been meaning to read, a novel about a woman who inherits a bookshop in Scotland. Maple, as they were now calling her, followed Sarah to the couch and, after circling several times, curled up on the cushion beside her, her head resting on Sarah's thigh. Michael built a fire in the fireplace, even though it wasn't quite cold enough to need one. but something about the gray day and the rain and the general coziness of everything made a fire feel right. He used kindling from the basket on the hearth, arranging it carefully before adding larger logs. The fire caught quickly, crackling to life, filling the room with warmth and the pleasant smell of burning wood. He settled into his armchair with his laptop, ostensibly to work on some emails, but mostly he found himself watching Sarah and the puppy, both of them peaceful and perfect in the firelight. "This is nice," Sarah said, without looking up from her book. "We should do this more often." "We should," Michael agreed. "We get so caught up in productivity, in getting things done. But this is what life is supposed to be about, isn't it?" Sarah looked up then, meeting his eyes. "I love you," she said simply. Maple sighed in her sleep, a long, contented sound, and they both laughed softly. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and soothing. The fire crackled, the old house settled around them with its familiar sounds. Time seemed to slow down, stretching out like honey. Sarah read 3 chapters of her book. Michael actually did get through his emails, then spent a pleasant half-hour browsing recipes online, looking for something interesting to make for dinner. He found a recipe for beef stew that seemed perfect for a rainy evening, slow-cooked with red wine and root vegetables. Around 11, Maple woke up and needed to go outside. Michael accompanied her to the backyard, standing under the porch overhang with an umbrella while she sniffed around the wet grass and eventually found a spot she deemed suitable. She came back inside shaking herself vigorously, spraying Michael with water droplets. "You're a menace," he told her fondly, toweling her off again. She wagged her tail in agreement. By noon, they decided it was time to be responsible and start making calls. Michael dialed the local animal shelter while Sarah posted in the neighborhood group. "Hartsville Animal Shelter," a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, Jen," Michael said. "I'm calling to report that we found a puppy this morning." "Oh, the poor thing." "She seems to be. We've dried her off, given her some water and a little food." Michael did, giving details about Maple's coloring, approximate age, and size. Jen listened carefully, typing as he spoke. "Let me check our records for any reports of lost dogs matching that description," Jen said. There was a pause, the sound of clicking keys. "Nothing so far, but it's still early. Sometimes it takes people a while to realize their pet is missing or to think to call us. Can I get your contact information?" Michael provided their number and address. "You can if you want, but honestly, she sounds like she's in good hands with you, and our shelter is pretty full right now. If you're willing to keep her for a few days while we try to locate her owner, that would be wonderful." "We can do that. Our vet tech is here until 3 today." "Perfect." Michael hung up and relayed the conversation to Sarah, who had finished posting online. "I posted in 3 different neighborhood groups," she said, with a photo and description. "And I checked Craigslist and the lost pets section of a couple of local websites." "So we have a house guest for a while longer," Michael said, looking at Maple, who had been watching their phone conversations with interest, her head tilted to one side. "Looks like it," Sarah said. She didn't sound disappointed. By 1 o'clock, the rain had softened to a gentle mist. Sarah looked out the window at the world transformed, everything green and glowing, the colors somehow more vivid after the rain. "We should take her for a walk," she said, "get her some exercise." They didn't have a proper leash, but they had a length of soft rope in the garage that would work in a pinch. Michael fashioned a makeshift collar and leash while Sarah put on her rain boots and jacket. Maple watched these preparations with growing excitement, her tail wagging faster and faster. When Michael approached with the rope collar, she sat automatically, perfectly, waiting for him to put it on. "Someone trained you," Michael said softly. They set out into the misty afternoon, walking slowly down their quiet street. The neighborhood was peaceful, most people inside staying dry. The air smelled clean and fresh, that particular scent of rain-washed earth and wet pavement. Maple walked beautifully on the leash, staying mostly at Sarah's side, only occasionally pulling slightly to investigate an interesting smell. She was clearly used to walks, used to people, used to structure. This made their hearts hurt a little. Somewhere, someone had put time into training this dog, loving this dog. That person must be worried sick. They walked past the Johnson's house with its perfect garden, now bejeweled with raindrops. Past the Martinez family's home, where their teenage son was washing his car in the driveway, taking advantage of the rain to rinse off the soap. He waved at them, smiling at Maple. "Oh," he called out. "Just found her this morning," Sarah called back. "Good luck." They continued on, turning onto Maple Street, which made them both laugh at the coincidence, and walking down to the small park at the end. The park was empty, the playground equipment dripping with rain. "Hartsville," Sarah said. They found a bench under a sheltering oak tree and sat, letting Maple explore on her long rope leash, always keeping her in sight. She sniffed every tree, every bush, cataloging the neighborhood dogs who had passed this way before her. Sarah asked quietly. Michael was silent for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe. We have, and the timing never seemed right." He paused. "It does," Sarah agreed, "but maybe that's just me romanticizing." "True, let's give it time, see what happens. If someone claims her, they claim her." "If not, maybe this is how we were meant to meet our dog," Sarah finished. Maple chose that moment to come bounding back to them, rope trailing, her face split in what could only be described as a smile. She put her front paws on Sarah's knees and looked up at her with such pure affection that Sarah felt her eyes sting with tears. "Sarah," whispered, running her hands over Maple's soft ears. At 2:30, they loaded Maple into their car. She jumped right in, settling on the back seat like she'd done it 1,000 times, and drove to the Hartsville Animal Shelter. The shelter was a modest building on the edge of town, but it was clean and bright, with cheerful murals of happy dogs and cats painted on the walls. Jen greeted them at the front desk, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour dusting her shirt. "Sorry," she said, brushing at the white powder. "It's my day to bake treats for the shelter animals. You must be Michael?" "This is Maple," Sarah said, then corrected herself. "I mean, that's what we've been calling her." "Maple," Jen repeated, smiling. "That's sweet." They followed Jen to a small examination room. Maple trotted along happily, completely unworried. The vet tech, a young man with multiple piercings and gentle hands, was waiting for them. "Hey there, gorgeous," he said to Maple, who immediately sat and offered her paw. He laughed. "Oh, you're a charmer." He ran the scanner over Maple's shoulders and neck, moving slowly, checking multiple spots. Sarah found herself holding her breath. Part of her hoped there would be a chip, information that would lead them to Maple's family. Part of her hoped there wouldn't be. "Nothing," the tech finally said. Sarah wasn't sure if she felt relieved or disappointed. "That doesn't mean she doesn't have an owner," Jen cautioned. "Not everyone microchips their pets, especially if she's young." Michael asked. "Keep doing what you're doing. Monitor the lost pet reports. Keep her safe and loved in the meantime." Sarah asked. "Then after a hold period, usually about a week, she'd be legally free to adopt if you wanted to." Sarah looked down. They thanked Jen and the tech and headed back to the car. The mist had cleared, and weak sunshine was trying to break through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light through the gray. "A week," Michael said as they drove home. "A week," Sarah agreed, but in her heart, she already knew. Maple had found them, or they had found her, and sometimes that was all the reason you needed. Back at home, they settled into the gentle rhythm of evening. Michael started the beef stew, browning meat and chopping vegetables, while Sarah gave Maple a proper bath in the big utility sink in the laundry room. Maple stood patiently while Sarah shampooed her, only occasionally trying to drink the bathwater. When she was clean and rinsed, Sarah wrapped her in a big towel and held her for a long moment, feeling the puppy's heartbeat against her chest. "Whatever happens," Sarah whispered into Maple's damp fur, "I hope you know you're safe now." Maple licked her chin in response. Dried and fluffy, Maple looked like a different dog, younger somehow, with her fur puffed out and soft. She pranced through the house, clearly feeling good about being clean, stopping to shake herself periodically just because she could. The stew began to simmer, filling the house with rich, savory smells. Michael opened a bottle of red wine, pouring 2 glasses. They sat at the kitchen table, Maple at their feet, and talked about everything and nothing. The book Sarah was reading, the project Michael was working on at his job, plans for fixing up the back deck this summer. Small talk, comfortable talk, the kind of conversation that happens when 2 people know each other so well that silence is never awkward. As the evening darkened, they turned on lamps throughout the house, creating pools of warm light. The rain returned, softer now, a gentle pattering against the windows. Michael added another log to the fire. Sarah found an old blanket for Maple to curl up on near the hearth. They ate the stew with crusty bread and butter, and it was perfect, rich and warming, exactly what the day called for. Maple watched hopefully but didn't beg, which was another sign of her training. "Just a little," Sarah said, putting a few small pieces of meat in Maple's bowl. The puppy ate them delicately, then returned to her blanket, circling 3 times before lying down with a satisfied sigh. After dinner, they washed dishes together at the sink, looking out at the rain-dark garden. Sarah washed, Michael dried. It was a ritual they'd developed early in their marriage, this quiet time of working side by side, hands in warm water, the day winding down around them. "This was a good day," Michael said, hanging up the dish towel. "It really was. Funny how sometimes the best days are the unplanned ones." Sarah smiled. Before bed, they had to solve one problem. Where would Maple sleep? Sarah had read somewhere that puppies shouldn't sleep in human beds, at least not at first. Something about establishing boundaries and good habits. "We could put her bed in the kitchen," Michael suggested. "That's pretty isolated." They ended up compromising, setting up Maple's blanket bed at the foot of their own bed. Close enough that she'd feel safe, far enough that they weren't inviting her up with them. Probably. Maple seemed thrilled with this arrangement. She circled her bed several times, then flopped down with a grunt of contentment, her eyes already drooping. Sarah and Michael got ready for bed with their usual routines. Sarah washed her face with lavender cleanser, brushed her teeth, braided her hair loosely for sleeping. Michael did the same, though without the braiding. They moved around each other in the bathroom like dancers who'd practiced their choreography for years. In bed, they read for a while, each absorbed in their own books. The room was quiet, except for the turning of pages and Maple's soft snoring from the foot of the bed. Rain whispered against the windows. The house creaked and settled around them. Sarah put down her book first, turning off her bedside lamp. "Good night, love," she said, kissing Michael's shoulder. He read for a few more minutes, then turned off his lamp too, leaving the room in darkness except for the faint glow from the streetlight outside filtered through the curtains. They lay in the dark, listening to the rain, to Maple's breathing, to each other's quiet presence. Sarah felt Michael's hand find hers under the covers, their fingers intertwining. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you," Michael whispered back. "For all of it," Sarah said. She didn't need to explain what this meant. It was everything. The home they'd built together, the life they'd created, the love they'd nurtured for 12 years. It was rainy mornings and warm kitchens and unexpected joys. It was choosing each other every day in 1,000 small ways. Sleep came gently, like the rain, a slow, peaceful descent into dreams. The last thing Sarah heard was Maple sighing contentedly from her bed at their feet, and the soft, steady rhythm of Michael's breathing beside her. In Sarah's dream, she was walking through a forest in the rain. The trees were enormous, old-growth giants that stretched up into a sky she couldn't see. Their canopy was so thick that the rain arrived as a fine mist, barely touching her skin. Maple was with her, but in the dream, Maple was both a puppy and something more, a guide perhaps, or a companion who had always been there. They walked together in comfortable silence, their feet following a path that seemed to make itself as they went. The forest was full of magic, the kind of magic that exists in the real world if you know how to look for it. Mushrooms glowed faintly in the shadows. Birds sang melodies that sounded almost like words. The rain made music on 10,000 leaves. They came to a clearing where sunlight broke through the clouds in cathedral rays. In the center of the clearing was a house, not unlike their own house, but somehow more vibrant, more alive, more itself. Light glowed in every window. Smoke rose from the chimney in a friendly way. "This is home," Maple said. Except Maple didn't speak aloud, the knowledge simply arrived in Sarah's mind. Sarah understood then that the dream wasn't showing her somewhere else, but rather revealing what was already true. Home wasn't just a place, it was a feeling, a choice, a collection of moments like the one she'd lived today. It was pancakes and rain and unexpected grace. It was choosing to be kind, choosing to be open, choosing to let life surprise you. "Thank you," Sarah said in the dream, and Maple's tail wagged, sweeping through the air like a conductor's baton. The dream began to fade then, gently, like watercolors bleeding into white paper. But the feeling remained, that sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. Sarah woke to find weak sunshine streaming through the bedroom curtains. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, leaving the world washed clean and new. She could hear birds singing their morning songs, more enthusiastic than usual, celebrating the return of clear skies. Maple was no longer in her bed at the foot of theirs. For a moment, Sarah felt a spike of worry, but then she heard sounds from downstairs, Michael's voice, soft and affectionate, and the click-click-click of puppy toenails on hardwood floor. She rose and padded downstairs in her bare feet, still in her pajamas. The morning was cool enough that she grabbed Michael's sweatshirt from the chair where he'd left it, pulling it on over her sleep shirt. It smelled like him, like coffee and cedar and home. In the kitchen, she found Michael sitting on the floor in his pajama pants and t-shirt, playing tug-of-war with Maple, using an old dish towel. Both of them looked ridiculously happy. "Good morning," Sarah said, laughing at the sight. Michael looked up, grinning. "Maple and I have been up for an hour." "I can see that." He gave the towel one more gentle tug, then let Maple win it, watching as she pranced around the kitchen with her prize, shaking it triumphantly. Sarah poured herself coffee from the pot Michael had made and leaned against the counter, watching them play. The morning sun slanted through the windows, turning everything golden. The kitchen still smelled faintly of yesterday's pancakes and last night's stew, layers of comfort built one meal at a time. Michael asked. Michael's expression grew more serious. "Nothing yet. I checked the shelter website, the neighborhood posts, everything." Sarah felt that complicated mix of emotions again, relief and guilt tangled together. "True." Michael stood up, brushing off his knees. "I know," Sarah said softly. They looked at Maple, who had abandoned the towel and was now investigating a patch of sunlight on the floor, pouncing on dust motes that danced in the beam. "She fits," Michael said simply. Sarah nodded. She understood exactly what he meant. Some things in life felt like struggle, like forcing puzzle pieces together that weren't quite right. But this felt easy, natural, like the missing piece sliding into place with a satisfying click. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Each morning, Michael or Sarah would check for messages, posts, calls about a lost puppy. Each day, there were none. They walked Maple 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. They learned her quirks. She loved puddles, but was oddly afraid of plastic bags blowing in the wind. She would sit patiently for treats, but lost her mind with joy when she saw a tennis ball. She snored when she slept on her back. She had an uncanny ability to know when someone was sad and would immediately press herself against them, offering wordless comfort. On the second day, they bought proper supplies, a real collar and leash, food and water bowls, high-quality puppy food, toys, a proper bed, though she still preferred her blanket by the fire. Sarah picked out a collar that was deep red, the color of autumn leaves, with a small brass tag that simply read Maple with their phone number on the back. Just in case, they told themselves, just temporary. On the third day, Sarah worked from home while Michael went to the office. Maple proved to be an excellent work companion, sleeping quietly under Sarah's desk while she typed emails and attended video calls. During one particularly tedious conference call, Maple rested her chin on Sarah's foot, and Sarah found herself smiling for no reason that had anything to do with quarterly reports. On the fourth day, they introduced Maple to their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who was 83 and had been widowed for 5 years. Mrs. Chen had always been kind but kept to herself, maintaining a polite distance. But when she saw Maple, her entire face transformed with joy. She knelt down, slowly, carefully, and let Maple sniff her hands before petting her soft ears. "My husband and I had a dog," Mrs. Chen said softly. "A golden retriever named Sunshine," Sarah offered. Mrs. Chen's eyes brightened. From then on, Mrs. Chen joined their evening walks. She walked slowly, and they adjusted their pace to match hers, talking about gardens and weather and memories. Maple seemed to understand that Mrs. Chen needed gentleness, walking carefully beside her, never pulling. On the 5th day, Michael's sister called, the one who lived 3 states away with her husband and 2 young children. "I heard you found a dog," she said without preamble. Michael sent photos, Maple sleeping by the fire, Maple playing in the backyard, Maple with her head resting on Sarah's lap while Sarah read. His sister called back within minutes. "Michael, that dog is looking at Sarah like she hung the moon." "We're trying to find her owner," Michael protested, but his heart wasn't in it. Don't even start with me. Dogs are family." Michael laughed. "Perfect. I'll tell the kids." After he hung up, Michael realized that somewhere in that conversation, he'd stopped thinking about Maple as a temporary guest and started thinking of her as theirs. On the 6th day, something shifted. They stopped checking the lost pet websites quite so obsessively. They stopped feeling guilty when they felt happy that no one had claimed her. They started making plans, training classes they'd enroll in, a fence they'd build in the backyard, a dog door for the mudroom. "We're keeping her," Sarah said that evening. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Michael agreed. "Is that wrong?" "We've done everything right. We've tried to find her owner, we've been responsible. But sometimes," he paused, searching for the right words, "sometimes the universe sends you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it." Sarah nodded slowly. "I think that rainy morning when she showed up on our porch, I think that was the universe telling us it was time. We'd been talking about getting a dog for years, but we were always waiting for the right moment. Maybe there is no right moment." That night, they called the shelter and told Jen their decision. If no one claimed Maple by the end of the 7th day, they wanted to adopt her officially. "I had a feeling," Jen said, and Sarah could hear the smile in her voice. "I could tell from the way you looked at her. Congratulations." "I think we're the lucky ones," Sarah said. The 7th day dawned clear and bright, with that particular quality of light that comes after rain has scrubbed the sky clean. Sarah woke early, before Michael, before Maple, and lay in bed watching the sunrise paint the ceiling in shades of pink and gold. Today was the day. If no one claimed Maple by the end of today, she would officially be theirs. Not a foster, not a temporary guest, but family. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with her excitement. Part of her still worried that someone would call at the last minute, devastated to have lost their beloved pet. But a larger part of her, the part that had spent the last week falling completely in love with this sweet, goofy, perfect dog, hoped with all her heart that the phone would stay silent. She slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Michael or Maple yet. Downstairs, she made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the garden come alive with morning. A cardinal landed on the fence post where she'd seen the robin that first rainy day. The roses were blooming now, encouraged by all that rain. Everything felt alive, renewed, full of possibility. Sarah turned to find Michael in the doorway, hair rumpled from sleep, Maple at his heels. "Couldn't sleep," Sarah admitted. She poured him coffee, added cream and sugar the way he liked. "Then we'll deal with it," Michael said gently. "We'll be sad, but we'll know we did the right thing. We gave Maple a safe place to stay while her owner looked for her." Michael smiled. They spent the day trying not to watch the clock, but of course they did anyway. Every hour that passed felt significant. No calls, noon, nothing, still silent. Sarah baked cookies, a nervous habit from childhood. Chocolate chip made with good butter and dark chocolate chunks, because if this was a day of waiting, it might as well be a day of comfort food too. The house filled with the scent of vanilla and melted chocolate. Michael worked in the garden, planting new flowers where the rain had washed some away. Maple helped, digging enthusiastic holes in completely wrong places and looking very pleased with herself. Mrs. Chen came over for afternoon tea, a new tradition they'd started. She ate 3 cookies and told stories about Sunshine, her golden retriever, and Sarah could see the healing that happened when she shared those memories. Sometimes love needed to be spoken aloud, remembered, honored. Maple reminds me of her, Mrs. Chen said, watching the puppy chase a butterfly through the garden. Not in looks, but in spirit, that joy. That's exactly it, Sarah agreed. She's just so happy about everything. Dogs teach us that, Mrs. Chen said wisely, how to be present, how to find joy in simple things. The afternoon stretched into evening. Michael grilled chicken for dinner, and they ate on the back deck, Maple at their feet, the air warm and sweet with the scent of honeysuckle from the fence. At 9:30, Sarah's phone rang. They both froze, looking at it like it might be a snake. The screen showed the animal shelter's number. Sarah's hand shook slightly as she answered. "Hi." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Michael moved closer, taking her free hand in his. Today. No one has come forward to claim the puppy you found, so if you still want to adopt her, she's all yours. I'll need you to come in tomorrow to sign some paperwork and pay the adoption fee, but officially, congratulations." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you for giving her such a good home." After she hung up, Sarah and Michael stood in the kitchen, holding hands, not quite believing it was real. Maple looked up at them from her bed by the fire, her tail wagging slowly, as if she understood that something important had just happened. "She's ours," Sarah said. "She's ours," Michael echoed. And then they were both laughing and crying at the same time, kneeling down to hug Maple, who accepted their affection with patient grace, as if this was exactly what she'd expected all along. The next morning, they drove to the shelter with Maple sitting proudly in the back seat, looking out the world passing by. Sarah had dressed up a little, putting on her favorite blue dress, as if signing adoption papers required special clothes. Michael wore the shirt Sarah had given him for his birthday, the one that brought out the color of his eyes. "We're being ridiculous," Sarah said, catching sight of herself in the visor mirror. "We're being parents," Michael corrected. At the shelter, Jen had all the paperwork ready. There was more of it than Sarah expected. Vaccination records, spay/neuter agreements, microchip registration forms. She filled everything out carefully, her hand cramping a little by the end. "Now," Jen said, pulling out one more form, "this is the official adoption certificate." Sarah and Michael looked at each other. "Maple," they said in unison. "Maple," Jen repeated, smiling as she wrote it down. "That's lovely." "No," Sarah said, "just Maple, after the trees on our street." Jen laughed. She handed them the certificate, and there it was in official black print. Maple, adopted by Sarah and Michael Henderson. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to be crying a lot lately, but they were good tears, happy tears, tears that came from a heart that was so full it had to overflow somewhere. They paid the adoption fee, a modest amount that seemed impossibly small for what they were receiving, and Jen handed them a small canvas tote bag. "Welcome package," she explained. "There's a toy, some treats, information about training classes, and a coupon for a free first vet visit. Also, we'd love it if you'd send us updates occasionally." "We will," Sarah promised. "Thank you for everything." Jen bent down to give Maple one last scratch behind the ears. "Be good, sweet girl." In the car on the way home, Michael pulled into a pet store. They spent a happy hour browsing the aisles, picking out toys and treats, and a new food bowl with Maple painted on it in cheerful letters. Sarah found a beautiful collar, leather with maple leaf designs pressed into it, that seemed almost too perfect to be coincidence. "The universe providing again," Michael said when she showed it to him. "Today," Sarah said proudly. "Congratulations." The clerk rang up their purchases with a knowing smile. "Absolutely," Michael agreed without hesitation. The first official week of Maple being their dog was both exactly the same as the week before and completely different. The routines were the same: walks, meals, playtime, cuddles. But now there was a sense of permanence, of building something that would last. They enrolled Maple in puppy training class at the local community center. The instructor was a patient woman named Rita who had been training dogs for 30 years. "She's smart," Rita said after the first session, watching Maple perform a perfect sit-stay. "Really smart." "We've wondered about that," Sarah said. Rita shrugged philosophically. "Sometimes we never know the whole story. Maybe she wandered away from a home that wasn't right for her and was looking for something better. Maybe she was meant to find you specifically." Sarah thought about that a lot in the days that followed. Maybe Rita was right. Maybe the story that mattered wasn't the beginning, but the middle and the end, the chapters they were writing together, one day at a time. They established new routines. Every morning, Michael woke first and took Maple out while coffee brewed. Then they'd all have breakfast together, Maple in her spot by the door, Sarah and Michael at the table. On the weekends, they'd make pancakes, and Maple would get a small bite or two as a special treat. Every evening after dinner, they walked as a family through the neighborhood. Sometimes Mrs. Chen joined them, sometimes it was just the three of them. They learned every dog in the neighborhood. Cooper the Doodle, Max the Terrier, Zeus the Great Dane puppy who was all legs and no coordination. Maple greeted them all with tail wags and play bows, making friends easily. Michael built the dog door he'd planned, installing it in the mudroom so Maple could go out to the fenced backyard whenever she wanted. The first time she figured it out, pushing through on her own and then coming back inside looking immensely pleased with herself, they both cheered like she'd won an Olympic medal. Sarah took hundreds of photos. Maple sleeping in a patch of sunlight, Maple with her favorite toy, Maple and Michael napping together on the couch, Maple covered in mud after discovering the joys of the garden after a rain. She created an album on her phone just for Maple pictures, and when she showed it to her sister over video chat, they scrolled through all 300 photos without her sister once suggesting it was too many. "You're smitten," her sister said, laughing. "Completely," Sarah agreed, not even embarrassed. They had their first minor crisis when Maple ate one of Michael's good shoes. Not chewed, ate. There were pieces of leather in the backyard to prove it. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, even though it wasn't her fault. Michael looked at his ruined shoe, then at Maple, who had the grace to look slightly ashamed, then back at the shoe. "It's just a shoe," he said finally. "I can buy new shoes." "I'm a little mad at the shoe situation," he admitted. "But mad at her? No, she's a puppy. Puppies do puppy things." It was such a small moment, but Sarah felt a rush of love for him, for his patience, his perspective, his ability to choose what mattered. Summer deepened, and with it, their life with Maple grew richer and fuller. The puppy who had arrived on their doorstep in the rain was growing, her legs getting longer, her paws growing into their promised size. She was going to be a big dog, the vet confirmed, probably 60 or 70 pounds when fully grown. "Good thing we have a big backyard," Michael joked, watching Maple race around in circles, chasing butterflies that always stayed just out of reach. They discovered Maple's favorite things: swimming in the lake at the state park, where she'd paddle out fearlessly and then shake water all over everyone on the beach. Car rides with the windows down, her ears flapping in the wind, her expression one of pure bliss. The crinkle of the treat bag, which she could hear from anywhere in the house. Mendez sharp with enthusiastic tail wags until he started carrying dog treats specifically for her. But her absolute favorite thing was breakfast time, specifically Sunday morning pancake breakfasts. It became a ritual. Every Sunday, no matter what else was happening, they made pancakes. Sometimes blueberry with lemon zest, like that first morning. Sometimes chocolate chip, or banana walnut, or plain with butter and syrup. Maple would sit patiently in her spot, and at the end, she'd get one small pancake of her own, plain and cut into pieces, which she'd eat with such delicate care that it made them both laugh. "She knows it's special," Sarah would say, watching Maple savor each bite. "She knows Sunday is family day," Michael would reply. And it was. Sunday became sacred. No work, no obligations, just the three of them. Sometimes they'd go hiking, Maple leading the way with her tail held high like a flag. Sometimes they'd stay home and work in the garden, Maple supervising from a sunny spot on the grass. Sometimes they'd drive to the beach, even though it was an hour away, just to watch Maple's joy as she discovered that waves were basically infinite things to chase. Mrs. Chen became a regular part of their lives too. She started joining them for Sunday dinners, bringing homemade dumplings or spring rolls, teaching them recipes that had been in her family for generations. Maple would lie at her feet during these dinners, occasionally resting her head on Mrs. Chen's lap, and the older woman would stroke her ears with a soft smile. "My husband would have loved her," Mrs. Chen said one evening. "I think he might have been right," Sarah said gently. Michael's sister visited with her family in August, and Maple was an instant hit with the kids. 6-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Jake spent hours throwing tennis balls, teaching Maple tricks, and generally being the kind of playmates that puppies dream about. On the last day of their visit, Emma cried when it was time to leave. "Oh," she asked, her face pressed into Maple's fur. "Maple lives here," Michael explained gently. "This is her home." After they left, Sarah found Michael in the backyard, throwing a ball for an exhausted but happy Maple. "Oh?" she asked. He smiled. "Just thinking about how much life has changed in a few months." Sarah nodded at Maple, who was now lying in the grass, panting happily. "Because of her, because of us." As summer turned toward fall, they noticed the trees beginning to change. The maple trees on their street, Maple's namesakes, started to show hints of red and gold at the edges of their leaves. The air grew cooler, crisper, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Maple discovered that leaf piles were the greatest invention in human history. Every pile that Michael raked, she'd immediately leap into, scattering leaves everywhere. He'd rake them again, she'd jump again. It became a game they both loved, even though it meant the actual work of clearing the yard took twice as long. "We're going to need to get her a coat for winter," Sarah said one October morning, watching Maple shiver slightly during their walk. The mornings were getting cold now, frost touching the grass, their breath making clouds in the air. Maple discovered that leaf piles were the greatest invention in human history. Every pile that Michael raked, she'd immediately leap into, scattering leaves everywhere. He'd rake them again, she'd jump again. It became a game they both loved, even though it meant the actual work of clearing the yard took twice as long. "We're going to need to get her a coat for winter," Sarah said one October morning, watching Maple shiver slightly during their walk. The mornings were getting cold now, frost touching the grass, their breath making clouds in the air. Maple discovered that leaf piles were the greatest invention in human history. Every pile that Michael raked, she'd immediately leap into, scattering leaves everywhere. He'd rake them again, she'd jump again. It became a game they both loved, even though it meant the actual work of clearing the yard took twice as long. "We're going to need to get her a coat for winter," Sarah said one October morning, watching Maple shiver slightly during their walk. The mornings were getting cold now, frost touching the grass, their breath making clouds in the air. Maple discovered that leaf piles were the greatest invention in human history. Every pile that Michael raked, she'd immediately leap into, scattering leaves everywhere. He'd rake them again, she'd jump again. It became a game they both loved, even though it meant the actual work of clearing the yard took twice as long. "We're going to need to get her a coat for winter," Sarah said one October morning, watching Maple shiver slightly during their walk. The mornings were getting cold now, frost touching the grass, their breath making clouds in the air. Maple discovered the red plaid coat that made her look distinguished and slightly ridiculous at the same time. She tolerated it with good grace, seeming to understand that warmth was worth a little indignity. Before they knew it, November arrived, and with it, a significant date. It had been 6 months since that rainy morning when Maple appeared on their porch. Maple asked. "Absolutely," Sarah said. "What do you think? A party?" They decided on both. They'd have a small party with their closest friends and neighbors, including Mrs. Chen, and they'd make Maple a special dinner of her favorite things. The day of the party, Sarah baked a cake, a regular one for the humans, and a special dog-friendly one for Maple made with peanut butter and banana. Michael decorated the house with balloons and streamers, much to Maple's confusion and delight. Their friends arrived bearing gifts, toys, treats, a new collar with Maple's name embroidered in gold thread. Mrs. Chen brought a beautifully wrapped package that turned out to be a hand-knitted blanket, cream-colored with maple leaf patterns in autumn colors. "I've been working on it for months," she said, watching as they spread it out. "I wanted her to have something special." Sarah hugged her, tears in her eyes. It's perfect. They ate and laughed and told stories. Their friend David recounted the time Maple had stolen an entire sandwich from his plate during a barbecue. Their neighbor Patricia described how Maple had alerted her to a small fire in her kitchen by barking frantically at her door. Every story painted a picture of a dog who had woven herself into the fabric of their community, who had become essential rather than just present. When it came time for cake, they gathered around. "Happy birthday" on the human cake. Maple's cake was smaller, shaped like a bone, decorated with a single candle. Michael asked. Absolutely. Maple sat perfectly still, her tail wagging, her eyes on the cake. When they removed the candle, she was allowed to have her first bite, and the pure joy on her face made everyone laugh. Mrs. Chen asked. "Probably more cake," David said. But Sarah thought differently. Looking at Maple, surrounded by people who loved her, in a home where she was safe and wanted and cherished, Sarah thought maybe Maple had everything she'd ever wished for already. Later, after everyone had gone home and they'd cleaned up, Sarah and Michael sat on the couch with Maple between them, the new blanket spread over all three of them. 6 months, Sarah said softly. It feels like longer. In a way, maybe she has been, Michael said. Sarah thought about that first rainy morning, how she'd woken to the sound of rain, how the world had felt soft and full of possibility. She thought about hearing that small scratch at the door, opening it to find a wet, bedraggled puppy who looked at her with such hope. She asked. Sometimes, Michael admitted. But then I remember, we didn't say no, we said yes. December arrived with the year's first real snowfall. Sarah woke to a world transformed, everything buried under 6 inches of pure white powder. The trees were frosted like a Christmas card. The street was silent in that particular way that only fresh snow creates. She looked over at Michael, still sleeping, then down at Maple, who slept in her bed at the foot of theirs, though truth be told, she spent most nights creeping up to sleep between them, and they'd long since stopped pretending to mind. "Maple," Sarah whispered. "Maple, wake up." Maple's eyes opened and she yawned, showing all her teeth. Sarah got up and went to the window, pulling back the curtain. Maple followed, putting her paws on the windowsill to look out. For a moment, she was perfectly still, staring at this strange new world. Then her tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster and faster. "What she likes?" Sarah asked. Maple's answer was to race downstairs, her feet skittering on the hard wood, and to wait by the back door practically vibrating with excitement. Sarah threw on boots and her heavy coat over her pajamas and opened the door. Maple launched herself into the snow, disappearing up to her chest in a drift, emerging with her face covered in white powder and an expression of absolute delight. She'd never seen snow before, at least not that they'd witnessed, and watching her discover it was like watching a child on Christmas morning. She leaped through the drifts, tunneled under them, tried to catch falling snowflakes on her tongue. She rolled on her back, making dog angels in the snow. She barked at the icicles hanging from the porch roof, perhaps challenging them to a duel. Michael appeared in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, wearing his pajamas and slippers. "She likes snow," he observed, grinning. "She loves snow," Sarah corrected. They stood together in the doorway, watching their dog experience winter magic, and Sarah felt that same sense of rightness she'd felt on that rainy morning 6 months ago. This was where they were meant to be. This was what life was supposed to feel like. Over the next weeks, winter settled in fully. They celebrated Maple's first Christmas, though they could only guess at her real age and birthday. They decided to celebrate her found day as her birthday every year. She opened presents with enthusiastic efficiency, tearing through wrapping paper to discover squeaky toys and chew bones and a new collar that matched Mrs. Chen's blanket. They took her to visit Michael's parents, a 6-hour drive that Maple handled like a seasoned traveler, sleeping most of the way with her head on Sarah's lap. Michael's mother fell in love with her instantly. "She has kind eyes," she said, stroking Maple's head. They spent a week there, and Maple charmed everyone. Michael's father, who'd claimed he wasn't a dog person, was caught multiple times sneaking her treats under the dinner table. His teenage nephew, who barely looked up from his phone for most visits, spent hours teaching Maple new tricks. Michael's sister joked on their last evening. On the drive home, Sarah felt overwhelmingly grateful. Grateful for Michael, for his family, for their home, for the life they'd built. And most of all, grateful for a rainy day in June and a puppy who had changed everything. Winter gave way slowly to spring. The snow melted in fits and starts, leaving the world muddy and brown before the first green shoots began to appear. The days grew longer. The birds returned, filling the mornings with song. And then, one morning in early April, Sarah woke to the sound of rain. Gentle rain, like that first morning. The same soft percussion against the windows, the same clean electric smell in the air. She lay in bed, listening, remembering. A year ago, well, almost a year, she'd woken to this same sound and had no idea how much her life was about to change. Maple stirred beside her, lifting her head. She was full-grown now, a beautiful 65-pound dog with a coat that gleamed with health and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief in equal measure. "It's raining, girl," Sarah whispered. As if she understood, Maple rested her head on Sarah's chest, and they lay there together, listening to the rain. Downstairs, Sarah could smell coffee brewing. Michael was already up, maintaining their morning ritual. She could picture him standing at the counter, measuring grounds with his usual precision, probably looking out at the rain-soaked garden. "Come on," she said to Maple. They went downstairs together, Maple's nails clicking on the hardwood, both of them moving through the familiar spaces of home. Michael looked up when they entered, smiling that smile that still made Sarah's heart skip after all these years. "Do ya?" he asked. They moved through the ritual together, the measuring, the mixing, the careful attention to temperature and timing. Maple sat at her spot, watching with the patience of long practice, knowing that good things come to those who wait. As the first pancake hit the griddle with its satisfying sizzle, Sarah looked around their kitchen. At Michael, concentrating on zesting a lemon, at Maple, tail thumping softly against the floor, at the rain streaming down the windows, the world outside soft and gray and full of possibility. She thought about that scared, wet puppy who had appeared on their porch. She thought about the choice they'd made to let her in, to take care of her, to open their hearts to the possibility of love and loss that comes with caring for another living being. She thought about all the moments that had followed, the walks and the training classes and the muddy paws and the chewed shoes. The way Maple had brought Mrs. Chen back into their lives, giving her a reason to leave her house and remember joy. The way she'd taught them both to be more present, more patient, more willing to find delight in simple things. "Do ya?" Michael asked, noticing her expression. "About how a year ago we didn't have her," Sarah said. "How different everything was." "Do ya?" he asked, though his smile said he already knew the answer. The pancakes piled up on the warm plate. They sat down to eat, Maple at their feet, the rain providing a gentle soundtrack. Everything was exactly as it should be. 3 years later, Sarah woke to the sound of rain. The same soft percussion, the same gray morning light, the same sense of the world being washed clean and made new. But this morning was different. She rolled over carefully, 7 months pregnant now, moving slowly with purpose. Michael was already awake, propped up on pillows, reading on his tablet. Maple was stretched across the foot of the bed, snoring softly. "Morning," Michael said, putting down the tablet to kiss her forehead. "Good, big." "I did." He nodded toward Maple, who had woken at the sound of their voices and was now making her way carefully up the bed, mindful of Sarah's belly, to give them both good morning kisses. 3 years ago tomorrow," Sarah said, scratching behind Maple's ears. "No. They'd talked a lot in recent months about how Maple would adjust to the baby. The vet and the books and the websites all said dogs could adapt well, that many became protective and gentle with new babies. But Sarah worried anyway. It was what she did now, worry about things. worry about being a good mother, about whether their life would change too much, about whether Maple would feel displaced. "She'll be fine," Michael said, reading her mind the way he often did. "She'll love the baby." "I know, I just want her to know she's still our girl." Maple, as if understanding, licked Sarah's face and settled herself carefully beside Sarah's belly, her head resting gently on the swell. They'd started doing this recently, Maple and the baby. Michael suggested. They made their way downstairs, the three of them, and prepared breakfast together. The kitchen had changed over the years, new countertops, fresh paint, a larger table to make room for the high chair that waited in the garage, ready to be brought in when the time came. But the essential character remained the same, warm, welcoming, full of love. As they ate their pancakes, blueberry with lemon zest, like that first morning, Sarah watched the rain and thought about how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. She thought about Mrs. Chen, who would be coming over later to bring the blanket she'd knitted for the baby, this one covered in puppies playing in a garden. About Michael's family, already planning their trip for after the baby arrived. About their friends, who had thrown them a shower full of laughter and advice and tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small. She thought about Maple, who had taught them about unconditional love, about joy, about being present in the moment, who had prepared them in so many ways for this next adventure. "We should tell her the name," Sarah said suddenly. Michael looked up, smiling. They'd known for weeks, but hadn't told anyone yet, wanting to keep it between them a little longer. Sarah leaned down to where Maple sat beside her chair. "Hey, sweet thurl, want to know something special? We're naming the baby Charlotte Maple Henderson, Maple as her middle name." Maple's tail wagged. Whether in understanding or just response to the attention, it was impossible to say. But Sarah chose to believe she understood, that she knew she was loved, that she knew her place in this family was secure and forever. Outside, the rain continued to fall, just as it had 3 years ago. But this time, they weren't waiting for something to begin. They were in the middle of it, the beautiful, messy, perfect middle of a life they'd built together. "Another rainy day," Michael said, raising his coffee cup as if in a toast. "Another perfect rainy day," Sarah agreed, raising hers to meet it. And Maple, sitting between them, threw back her head and howled, a joyful, exuberant sound that made them both laugh and probably woke up the neighbors, but perfectly captured how they all felt. This was happiness. This was home. This was what it meant to say yes when life showed up at your door in the rain, wet and hopeful and waiting to be loved. This was everything. Thank you for spending this rainy day with Sarah, Michael, and Maple. May you find your own perfect rainy mornings, your own unexpected joys, and your own chances to say yes when life offers you something beautiful. And if you're reading this on a rainy night, trying to fall asleep, I hope their story brings you peace and sweet dreams. May you wake tomorrow to sunshine and possibilities, to love that stays, and moments that matter, to pancakes and puppies and all the simple miracles that make life worth living. Sleep well, dear reader. Sleep well.